And it looks like we are live. We're as live as life can be here on a small planet in a remote corner of the universe. So, how are you today, Barrett?
I'm doing pretty good, Chris. I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, I'm really glad we're here for our next conversation and for connecting around sharing the message of A Course in Miracles and how it fits into our lives.
Yeah, it absolutely is. The back door, the escape route when life starts to become so overwhelming that you're ready to throw in the towel. I think that for those of us who have discovered the Course, we always are able to find both solace and insight by reverting over to A Course in Miracles. So it is a solid anchor in an ever fluctuating universe.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that, and I think life just presents those kinds of curveballs, and we have to acknowledge where we are with them, but at the same time, we can use the thought system of the course to unplug the intensity, so that even while we're still going through the same challenging circumstance, we can come to see that it doesn't have to be the reason for our emotional state of being, that the emotions can come and go, and that I like that back door is always there. And it's, I don't know, when you said that, I got this image of like a stairway to heaven. Literally, it's the stairway to heaven. To realize that we're really not separate from that state of heaven, even though we might be thinking that we are.
Exactly. And, today our recording is on a full moon. The full moon is in Taurus today. So that, again, gives us that imagery of the extremes because when we have the full moon and the new moon, we're having extremes. And this particular full moon is turning out to be a very nice passage. I think a lot of people are feeling um, a more positive, supportive energy from what's going on in the interaction of the planets as they're dancing around the sun here. But speaking of the astrological configurations, I do in fact have your chart here. So
All right, I'm curious to see what you see in there.
yeah, this is very interesting because it's a chart that has a lot of watery elements in it. Um, your sun, your natal sun, is in Scorpio, as we know, and your ascendant is in Cancer. So, with those two heavy, watery configurations in the chart, you definitely, at an early point, were drawn towards spirituality. And you have Jupiter landing in Cancer in the seventh house, or in the 12th house, in an exact trine to your natal sun. So when you are moving around in that world of spiritual exploration, spiritual unfolding, that sort of thing, that's what makes you feel expansive. That makes you feel, good. You're in your element. You're feeling like you're where you're supposed to be. You do have Mars and Leo in your first house, so you are an initiator. Sometimes that can be to your advantage. Sometimes you can be a bit impulsive and say, "Okay, let's do it now, damn it," and then have to go back and re-examine all of the things you've done and figure out how to unravel the spaghetti so that you can get things back on track. You have an interesting combination here. You've got Saturn in Leo in your third house. The third house is all about communication. So this can show up in a couple of different ways. Number one, it can show up as feeling like you were somewhat suppressed as a child. Perhaps your communication was ignored or overlooked. So there may be an underlying frustration about, I want to be heard, which is the first level of that configuration. But then within that, because Saturn is a great teacher, it caused you to come to the realization of, I don't just want to be heard, I want to be heard in a way where I am teaching, where I am useful, where my communication has value and meaning. So that actually is, a set of conditions that really give a lot of insight as to what it is that has compelled you to pursue spirituality. Your moon is in Gemini, so you're good with tech, but and you were initially drawn into that realm. But the reality is that where you get your real sense of enrichment and fulfillment, it's always going to be in that 12th house area, that Piscean area,
Mm.
where spirit becomes fully visible and where you can talk about spirit and share the visions and the imagery that you're getting from your spiritual journey on this particular cycle. And you've got Neptune at 29 degrees. 29th degree of any sign is like concentrated.
Mm.
And Neptune, again, rules Pisces. It's all about spirit, it's about creativity, it's about the arts. But it also has that reminder, the ongoing reminder that everything is illusion.
Mm.
And so when you have to confront the elements in your life that you've created, you have to arrive at that realization that I have created an illusion, and so I can disengage and resolve the illusion by, uh, stepping back from it, from no longer having an attachment to it or feeding into it. So that's sitting in your sixth house, and the sixth house is all about career.
Mm.
So your career obviously is moving you in the direction of resolving the illusions in life and helping others come out of the cave, as it were. If you remember what Plato said about all of us, we're living in a cave and surrounded by a shadowy world,
Yeah.
and that definitely is, the greater view of what happens here in the earthly realm. So, does that seem to make sense? Does the astrological configurations like add up and seem like they make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I think that that's a really incisive reading. The thing that kind of comes to mind from what you're sharing is in my childhood, when I was very young, I didn't really talk very much, and my parents were a little concerned about how quiet I was, and they said that you know the kids normally kind of say a few words and then they'll do like phrases and then but I went from hardly talking at all to basically speaking in full sentences around the age of 4 or 5 and um, so it does connect with one of the things you were saying and this desire to use communication as a way to teach and to help. um, I connect a lot with that, and as you said, I do have capability and like technical and a background in working with computers, but you're right, it doesn't really light me up like
Hmm.
working with people around their spirituality does. That's really what feeds me and pulls me forward and to want to keep doing this work and um, be excited about doing this work is the idea of helping people shift and really stand more fully in the truth of who they are. So yeah, I connect with a whole lot of what you're saying, and I think I'll probably listen to it again because I'm sure I'll get more as I reconnect a lot of what you were sharing.
Yeah, and that was just an overview. I mean, an in-depth reading always gives people a lot more information to work with and a lot more of a sense of, what they're vectoring toward in the different elements within their lives. But the other thing I failed to mention was that your midhaven, which is the high part of the chart, which is our destiny point, and that basically is, where the sun stands at midday and there are no shadows or no illusions. That's where we're seeking, and that falls in the sign of Pisces at 25 degrees Pisces. So once again, that loops back in to that watery Piscean, Cancerian, Scorpionic kind of trine, and it's all about again going beyond the threshold and catapulting to that higher realm rather than staying in the land of the mundane and with all of our trials and struggles and tribulations. So astrology is meaningful and it can be very much a useful tool, but it still is defining our ego. And of course, the ego is simply a shell. You know, that's just the little bumper car that we ride through this material world with. Uh, but that leads me to a thought here I was going to toss out to you, because when we look deeply into the Course, we come to at least consider the idea that there's only one of us here, that there are, um, multiple manifestations of that one self, but really there was only one creator and one creation, so we are the combined essence of that creation. So that leads me down that trail of considering what the ego actually is. How many egos do you think there are, Barrett?
How many egos does it take to change a light bulb, right?
Yes, right. And never get it changed. That's the scary part.
Yeah, I mean that cuts right to the quick. You know, the issue that we all have is our belief in the ego, and the stronger that we hold to that, the more suffering and pain that we experience. So what do we do with that, and what does it mean? It does look like if there's 7 billion people here on the planet, that there's got to be 7 billion egos. But like you just said, that's just an illusion. You know, there is only one ego. There is only one false thought of separation. And the truth is there's even less than that. There's no false thought of separation. That's just an idea that we seem to grasp onto on the level of mind. And because the pain of that separation thought was so intense, and the guilt over believing that we tore ourselves away from God was so, visceral and so heavy, we had to try to run from that. And that gives us the so-called Big Bang, gives us the so-called creation of the universe, where we shatter ourselves, this collective Son of God, into billions and billions of fragments, and then try to hide out in the fragment and believe that the fragment is what we are. So that's my understanding of the miscreation story of our universe, that we have taken this one mind and we have believed that we could tear it apart and believed that each little part is what we are. And from the ego's perspective, that's great news, because then all of a sudden we have someone else to blame. It's not our fault. That's kind of the ego's rallying cry. It's not my fault.
Exactly. Well, and that, considering and taking all that into consideration, then the next step, of course, is how do we go about resolving this fracture that we have in fact generated, and where are we going as a collective as far as the ultimate vision of how to put a patch on this and to bring it back into wholeness. And that again goes back to a certain level of paradox, because we've got all these people, all these egos we're surrounded by, or we appear to be surrounded by, and yet going out and proselytizing and going out and trying to convert and save and criticize and fix all of the people around us seems to be the kind of journey that becomes, an endless assault on something that wasn't even real to begin with. So how do we actually start to take those first steps back toward resolving the issue as it occurred?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a really good point, Chris, because if, we need someone else to believe this in order for us to be healed, it's sort of like, well, if we're all just delusional aspects of mind believing that we're here, all we've really accomplished if we get an army of course students with us is we have a whole bunch of delusional people sharing our delusion with us. So, how does the unreal crack in that oneness get undone? Well, how do we realize a lie is untrue, other than accepting that it never really was true? And that's kind of, like you said, the paradoxical nature of this is like, how do we heal what has only always been whole, except to realize that there was never a need for healing. That's a tough concept when it seems like we're really entrenched in a body that has problems and has people that it has arguments with and has pains and it has sorrow. How do we deal with that level of pain? And I think actually that kind of question is pretty well encapsulated by a question that one of our viewers asked us to talk about. So I'm just going to bring that into the fold and we can include that in our conversation here. This is from Catherine Hunt. She says, "Thank you both. I would ask, how do you explain child abuse to one who, as an adult, is in healing process? A child doesn't ask for that abuse. They can understand that their reaction to and sense about the abuser is an area of their responsibility. But as to the abuse itself, why it happened remains a quandary, as no child asks for that treatment. Thanks for your thoughts."
That is very, very deep subject, because I have observed in psychotherapy, in working in and around that field peripherally for a while in my life, that there is an entire school of so-called spiritual enlightened thinking that says, well, in some previous lifetime you created this for yourself, or before you came into this world you created this for yourself. And that puts the full responsibility back on the individual who has been going through these terrors and these hideous experiences. And yet, at the same time, there is a certain element of truth within that, that all of the experiences in our lives were something that through, again, the act of miscreation, we somehow managed to conjure up. So then it becomes an extremely touchy region to approach, because you want to make the person realize that that there's no guilt or shame in having created this, but at the same time, having gone through the experience of it, there's no easy balm for releasing the pain and for releasing the horrors that the mind carries with it. Right. So again, that causes us to go to the next level. One of my favorite lines in the course is that I need do nothing, and basically that gets us back to that area of atonement, of surrender, and allowing the healing to be done upon us by that higher part of ourselves, by our Christ self, in order to resolve that and heal it. So from my perspective, I think that it is something that, as torturous and as hideous as it was, it's still forcing you back to that point where you're allowing the problem to be resolved before it actually occurred. Does that seem right?
Yeah, and another element that I think is always helpful in these types of questions is to really emphasize that it's never the individual who has chosen these traumas, these painful circumstances for themselves. And the reason that that's helpful is because it helps us to step out of our belief that we are an individual. So, to put that a different way, well, if it's not the individual that chose this, then what is it? Well, it's like you said, it's that choice for miscreation that happened at the level of the mind. And you could say it's at the level of the collective mind, when we all chose together to believe that we were something other than completely one with love itself. So you could say that in that one, what the Course calls the tiny mad idea, that every painful experience, every sad or tragic happening that plays itself out in this world was contained in that one false idea. And because we decided to latch onto that, we we made these things seem believable. And a part of our journey is to look them in the eye, not with the goal of, like you said, increasing guilt or reinforcing a belief in pain or sorrow, but to look them in the eye and to awaken from them, to realize that there was nothing there in the first place. And only when we can hold that view uh, is the pain from these circumstances fully released. So I agree, it definitely takes a lot of compassion. It takes a lot of willingness to go and look into the shadows within ourselves. But when we do that with a desire for release from the shadows, when we do that with the intention of finding the happiness that lies on the other side of these oftentimes painful circumstances, then we can step into that sense of wholeness again, and we can release some of the pain that we've been holding on to that's tied into our belief in individuality and separation.
Well, and I think also, Barrett, one of the most important aspects of this type of a journey, because a lot of people, whether it be child abuse or a multitude of other things that have occurred in their lives, um, because, as in our private conversation earlier this morning, I mentioned the Holocaust, and, there's all these different memories. There's all these different images of this dire experience on the earthly plane. Um, and the only way out of it is a return to source. But when we feel like we're on that journey in a singular way, it's all about just me, I'm alone, I have no help, I have no resource. I think that that is, um, I think that that is the first thing that we have to do, is to work on awakening our sense of connection to spirit, because we're never alone, and the journey itself is something that can actually be resolved literally instantaneously, according to the degree of our acceptance of our connectivity to the divine. And of course, that is once again turning into a face-off with the ego. Are we going to protect the ego, which is our natural instinct, because we did create the ego, so it's very dear to us. But at the same time, it is the one singular obstacle to real healing in a systemic way, where it goes from the depths of our emotional being up into the realm of our mental being, and ultimately is resolved in the realm of our spiritual identity, our spiritual being. So I think that it's very important that people realize that you're on a journey, but you're not alone. You have not been abandoned here. You were the one who stepped away from God for the moment. But the truth is that God has always been willing to participate in that reclamation journey as you turn around and head, back towards spirit.
Yeah, it reminds me of I think there's a Sufi prayer or a song that sometimes sung in our meditation, where the entire thing is simply turning back to God, as though we turned our back on God, and then we just over and over again turn back to God. We keep turning back to remembering that source, and so that imagery that you're sharing really resonates with me, and I think that's the crux of it, that we've turned away from God in our mind by identifying with the ego. And as we bring it into the light, then all of a sudden we have an opportunity to question, and do I really want this? And I know on my own journey, sometimes I get to that question point and I say, hell yeah, I want this. I still want to be me, and even if it comes with some pain or whatever, it's like that's a price at times I say I'm willing to pay. But eventually we're all going to come to that point and say, no, there's no more reason for the suffering. We've relinquished our attachment to ourself enough that we say, this doesn't give me what I want, what it's promised even. The ego has this whole list of promises that it's gonna, you're gonna be happy, you're gonna be successful, everything's gonna be perfect. You get to be the king of the hill, that kind of thing. And sometimes we need to try a lot of these things to find out that that wasn't it. Maybe we make some money and we find out that wasn't the source of the happiness. Maybe things are good in a relationship, but then all of a sudden they're not, and we realize that that relationship wasn't the cause of our happiness. And at some point we get to the bottom of our list, we've crossed everything off because we tried it all, and then we have to say, like Helen and Bill said, there must be a better way. And that's when the willingness shifts into allowing us to kind of open a door and to see, and maybe in that moment we're ready to take a step through that door and see what's on the other side. And the good news is what's on the other side is us. It's what we've always been waiting for this whole time. And like you said, that God is always here waiting for us to, in a sense, just remember that God has never left.
Exactly. And what you were speaking about is quite interesting because it's one of my favorite things. It's the Sufi practice of twirling, where you see the dervishes swirling and swirling and swirling. And if any of our viewers ever have the opportunity to attend some of the Sufi practices, I would say go check out the dervishes, because you really do participate with them when they are twirling. You get drawn into it. You feel your spirit is being twirled back into higher consciousness. So that was a beautiful illustration, and it's something that is very dear to my heart because I do love a lot of the Sufi mystical experiences that they're presenting to the world.
I think maybe I was a Sufi in another lifetime, because this twirling, for me, every now and then I just feel called to do it. All of a sudden, like I've got to twirl, and it's interesting because there's this experience while I'm spinning that my mind kind of starts to creep in, and it's like, oh, maybe I should slow down. What if I fall over, or something like that. And then I start to get a little off balance, and I just need to release that thought, and all of a sudden I'm back in the experience, and it's almost like I'm not doing it. It's just happening. I'm being twirled in a sense, and it's a really great exercise for like letting go of the need for control. And as I'm able to do that, it turns into a really heartfelt space. So
exactly, and that's again popping us back to that realization that doing is distinctly different from thinking about doing. And as we're engaged in the activity, as we're engaged in our meditation, as we're engaged in reading the Course, as we're engaged in going out and interacting with the world around us, then we become part of a flow process where, again, the ego's influence is diminished. But when we stop and start thinking about, oh, I am doing this, I am doing that, then we're opening the door, creating an invitation for the ego to get involved with its critical eye and say, oh, yeah, you're doing this, but you're doing it all wrong. Your finger should be straight out instead of curled, whatever. But it just goes on and on and on. And the one thing you can be guaranteed is that the ego has always got a criticism for you as soon as you give it the opportunity to voice its opinion.
Yeah. If you're feeling like you want to be cut down, you ask the ego for its opinion.
Pretty much, it definitely has. It has a lot of opinions, and unfortunately, most of them are somewhat scathing.
Yeah.
Well, this was kind of a fun little, variation on a theme here, and
very free-flowing in itself.
yes, actually, it is very much like dervishes moving across the floor. So perhaps that's the image that we'll want to share with our viewers at some future point, also.
Yeah.
But as we're advancing now beyond this full moon, we've got a lot of opportunity in the air. We're winding down with autumn and now starting to focus on winter. So do you have anything major on the horizon as far as events or places where people can connect with you, Barrett?
I'm kind of putting together some more workshops, but right now I'm in the middle of some ongoing classes. I just as kind of a closing thought for today, I would say that as you're going through your life, um, just be aware if you're coming from the heart, if you're coming from that place of compassion and connection. And if you find that you're not, consider taking a breath and saying, how can I connect in with that heart more deeply? How can I how can I see the spirit in my brother? And how can I help those people uh, to have that experience of heart as well? So when you start to have those kinds of thoughts in your mind, it just see if that changes your experience too. Um,
Well, yeah, because it's definitely one of the great truths is that whenever you open the door to spirit, spirit will respond.
mm,
Uh, and the response will be to the degree that you are sincerely surrendering, sincerely saying, "Okay, enter." So yeah, that's very much an important part of the unfolding of this journey that all of us are on is to open the door so that you're no longer alone. Uh,
yeah, and so how about you, Chris? Do you have any events that are kind of happening right now, or you want people to know about?
well, right now I'm working on one of the first live events I've done in quite a while because generally I'm all in cyberspace and telephones. But November 30th, for people in the Chicago area, I will be doing readings and dialoguing and interacting with people. So keep your ears and eyes open. I'll be posting information about that. And then, I'm kind of envisioning something as we move forward into the new year, some kind of combined event with Barrett. So I'm sure we'll be getting the word out on where to come hang out with us and
Yeah.
maybe even do a little twirling with us. Who knows?
Hey, that sounds fun to me.
Well, Barrett, I will talk to you in about 1 week, and I'm sure that we will have a multitude of experiences to share when this next cycle comes round.
Yeah. Well, all my appreciation to you, Chris. I just want to acknowledge that heart space that I really feel that when we're communicating here, and hopefully that spills over and people are feeling that as they're watching the videos too.
Well, and I think it's a growing process, an unfolding process, but ultimately it takes us back to one. So here
Mm.
we are in our oneness.
All
So
right.
I'll see you in 7 days.
Okay. Have a great week, Chris.
You too. Bye.
Bye.